Hey, what's up everybody? How are you doing? This is The Organic Guy. Welcome to the first ever book review of the Organic Book Club. And just in case you didn't know, the Organic Book Club is a community that is super passionate about reading, especially in the domain of organic, regenerative, and sustainable food systems. But the book club is special not because it gives you the discipline, the motivation, the urge to read at least one book a month, but also because it gives you access to a community, which, by the way, I think is the most important thing that even people who love to read lack. You can be able to share the ideas and the concepts that you've just learned from the book. This is super important, very simple concept that the mainstream media actually uses a lot. And that is the concept of repetition, because they understand that the more you repeat something, the more it's able to stick in people's minds. So it gives you that opportunity to also share some of the concepts and ideas that you took out from the book that you've just read. And this way it actually helps you to stick some of those concepts in the long term. And that's what you want when you read a book. You just don't want to read 100 books a year just for the sake of it. You want to read a book and make concepts be part of who you are from the book. So this is what the Organic Book Club makes you get, and for me it's a no-brainer. You definitely want to be part of this community, and the best way to do that is to head over to theorganicguy.com/book club. That is theorganicguy.com/book club to be part of this special community. All right, let's get straight into it. For our very first book review, we have a special book, and that is by the name of An Agricultural Testament by Sir Albert Howard, the famous British agriculturalist, and is basically widely regarded as the founder of the organic movement. And we will get to understand why this is the case. And I highly encourage you to make sure you grab your copy and read these concepts by yourself. Remember, that's what the Organic Book Club is all about. We want you to read these concepts by yourself so that you can ingrain these ideas better. So what I'm gonna do is just give you a quick overview of what the book is all about, and then after that you are able to go and read by yourself these concepts so that they can better stick with you for the long time. All right, just to give you a little bit of background about the book is written in the 1940s, right about when World War II is about to come to an end. Governments have a lot of chemicals from the war. They're not quite sure how they're going to use it. They just discovered the use of nitrogen from the atmosphere. They have it. They have been building a lot of explosives with it. They don't know what to do with it. And a lot of agricultural scientists come in and say, you know what, we can use this in agriculture. And that turns agriculture into its head, because now every scientist within the agricultural world looks at synthetic fertilizers as the savior of the world, right? And pesticides as something that will be able to drastically reduce some of the losses that farmers encounter as a result some of the pests and diseases they get through farming seasons. So there's a combination of these two things that are being pushed by scientists, saying, you know what, this is the solution. We found the solution. We found a way to remove up to 80% of the nitrogen that is in the air and then put it directly to the crops, and we're going to have this exponential growth of productivity within our farming systems. But then there comes Sir Albert Howard, and he says, look guys, I think you got this thing wrong. I have an alternative view, and this is what he shares with us in this particular book. For him, he starts with a very simple proposition, and that's the fact that the soil is the most important capital of a nation. And at that time, a lot of nations were struggling with this proposition. And for him, what he did, he actually looked at nature and tried to observe what does nature do to maintain its permanent fertility. And one of the things that he saw is that nature always has mixed farming, right? It always has some animals, it has different species and varieties in the soil, all right? And the second thing he observes is that the soils are always covered, whether with grass or something else. And the third thing that he observes in nature is the fact that nature is always manuring itself. It doesn't need someone to give it an external fertilizers. And the fourth thing that he observes from nature is the fact that both the crops and the livestock actually take care of themselves. And when he observed these things in nature and looked at the agriculture of the Occident, right? This is a new word I learned from the book itself, which basically means the agriculture of the West. So the West referring to Western Europe, the United States and Canada. It was sort of the opposite. So you had a lot of monocultures, planting one crop in huge fields of land. The other thing was there was introduction of heavy machines, and the third thing was that these farming systems were using a lot of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And the fourth thing that he observes is that there is a lot of pests and diseases emerging in these farms. And this observation puzzles a lot of people, but for him, he says that this is a result of an imbalance that is created by the agriculture of the West. And this imbalance is created mainly by three hungers. So the hunger of feeding the people in local areas, the hunger of feeding people in the cities, and the third was the hunger of feeding the machines. Europe and the Western world established a lot of industries, and these industries needed raw materials for them to function. And as a result, it was putting a lot of pressure on the land to produce consistently to feed these three hungers. So for him, he looks at this situation and he sees that there is a great imbalance in the process. So you observe that in nature, there are two main cycles, the cycle of growth and the cycle of decay. So these two balances must be maintained in nature. But for the agriculture of the West, there was a lot of growing, but there was very little recycling after the growth has happened. So this led to a lot of breakage of the cycle. And for him, this was a major concern. And a lot of people were asking a lot of questions. How can we maintain the fertility of the soils? He looks at them and tells them what. One thing you can be sure of is that you're not going to have fertility from using synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. And he offers them a solution. And the solution he offers is the Indo process, which is basically composting. He names it Indo process because of where he was. At that time, he was in India. Now, he wasn't the first person to actually discover composting, but he provided practical steps that farmers can use and can take to actually build a better composting systems for themselves. So he gave them which crops had better carbon nitrogen ratio, how farmers could better improve the aeration of their composting to have better results with the composting. And this is one of the most important aspects of the book actually. He says composting is important because it provides humus to the soil. Here's the most important part. Because humus is what helps form the mycorrhizal associations in the soil. This is it. This is the most important part of the book. And at that time for him, he says that this process was super important, even trumping the discovery of the root nodules and legumes that are able to fix nitrogen in the soil. And guess what? Many years later, the science eventually actually caught up with him, and the science is now saying that yes, indeed, mycorrhizal associations is a very important part of growing crops. They help crops to defend themselves against pests and diseases. They help crops better get the nutrients from the soil. They help crops actually undergo drought resistant better. So he had this hypothesis at that time and people were laughing at them. But guess what? Now we do know that all these principles and his insistence of using compost and humus to establish the mycorrhizal association was super important to growing healthy and nutritious crops. And for him, it's very clear that these mycorrhizal associations cannot be formed by the use of fake fertilizers and pesticides. And then at that time, a lot of countries were dealing with a lot of soil erosion, which for him, erosion was basically nature's way of removing the worn out soil. In fact, this process was so bad that the president of the United States at that time, Theodore Roosevelt, actually addressed the nation this issue of soil erosion. I mean, you can remember his famous quote that he talks about that the nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. And then he went on to address the problem of diseases for the plants and the animals. He gives out a very simple remedy for farmers. If you want to prevent pests and diseases, you have to ensure that your soil is fertile. So once your plants are actually grown in soils that are rich in fertility, then plants can be able to better resist pests and diseases. And he actually showed this through his experiments throughout East Asia, especially in India, and also throughout Rhodesia, which was the British protectorate in East Africa. He showed, for example, in Kenya, how farmers who were growing maize under striga, just after one season of doing composting into the crops and establishing the mycorrhizal association in their crops, they were actually able to prevent striga in their crops. So he did this with the livestock as well in India, where he kept his own livestock and fed them with crops that were rich in humus and mycorrhizal associations. And again, he proved that his livestock were able to resist the diseases. Well, after pointing out some of the obvious diseases and plagues that were ravaging the agriculture of the Western world, he actually also pointed blame to the way research was being done. And according to him, research was too much departmentalized. You had plant scientists on one side, you have plant geneticists on the other, you have pathologists on the other, and you kind of departmentalize science. But when you look at nature is really a continuous process. So you have people learning more and more about less and less. So you ask plant geneticists about how the soil works, they wouldn't tell you. And for him, this was a big problem. And the insistence of the science at that time on the chemistry part of agriculture and the physics part of agriculture, without talking about the biology part of agriculture, which was the most important part of agriculture. And the fact that the soil is actually a living thing. So for him, the way research was structured at that time, and arguably the way research is structured today, was a huge problem for him. And this criticism of how science was done actually inspired a lot of people. So for example, J.I. Rodell in the United States to start the J.I. Rodell Institute, which now is actually running the longest running comparison between organic and conventional over 30 years, which has got some exciting results from that process. So he goes ahead to give out some major conclusions in the book, one of them being reminding people that the soil is the most important capital, and that it was the role of government to try to see how they could maintain the fertility of the soil. And for him, it was very clear that could not be done by using synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. And he was very adamant that only way to establish the mycorrhizal association between the soils and the plant was through the use of humus. Very important point. And for him, really, the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers was a calamity to humanity. His second conclusion was how important it was that people at home and their children at school actually make sure that they're being taught on the difference between the food that was grown with humus and the food that wasn't. And for me, this is really what inspired a lot of people to try and find ways to differentiate between these two kind of foods, the food that was grown with humus and the one that wasn't. And I think up until now, it's what now we call it as organic food versus conventional food. And then for him, the last and the most important conclusion in the book is that almost a half of the world's humankind diseases will actually disappear if foods were being fed from soils that were rich in fertility. And boy, how real is that prediction today? So this book is a gem. This book is a must read, and make sure you read these concepts by yourself, because that is the best way you can ensure that this concept actually stick with you in the long term. Remember, you can always join the Organic Book Club. Next month, we have an exciting book that we'll be reading. You want to read that one with us. So make sure you head over to theorganicguy.com/book club to be part of the community. And in this age where reading is super important, you want to be part of the community. So see you on the inside. Till the next one, remember to be organic.